if there is a deal, it could mushroom to become a real peace deal across the region.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battle Lines.
We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
President Zelensky has for the first time acknowledged that his forces are conducting a cross-border offensive inside Russia.
I just find bombs and I find dead people, but it's a really scary thing for me.
If I had not moved my head at that very last instant, the assassin's bullet would have perfectly hit its mark.
On today's episode, Global Health Editor Paul Nuki joins me from Tel Aviv to report on the mammoth diplomatic effort to avert a full-scale war between Israel and Iran. Then we talk to Associate Editor Dominic Nicholls about Ukraine's operation in Kursk, the first foreign incursion into Russia since the Second World War, and how it could tip the balance of the conflict in Ukraine. Before we begin, a quick message from me. You can now subscribe to Battle Lines on Apple Podcasts. Subscribers gain exclusive early access to weekly bonus episodes 2 weeks before they're available anywhere else. This week, my colleague David Knowles and former Royal Navy Captain Tom Sharp discussed naval lessons from the Black Sea and how China's enormous new invasion mothership rewrites the rules of war. Listen to this and other exclusive Battle Lines episodes podcasts with early access for subscribers only on Apple. It's Friday, August 16th. For 2 weeks, the world has been braced for a full-scale war in the Middle East, as Iran vowed to avenge the Israeli killing of Hamas's top leader in Tehran and Hezbollah's number 2 in Beirut. But at the last moment, a diplomatic path to averting disaster may have been found, and it runs through Gaza. Paul Nuki told me about the effort to bring the Middle East back from the brink. Well, for 2 weeks, we have been expecting an Iranian strike on Israel in revenge for the killing of Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Just a few days ago, senior Israeli military figures were briefing that a twin attack by Iran and Hezbollah was inevitable. People have been warning of the potential of a full-scale region-wide war in the Middle East. And now it looks like we're back to the diplomatic track. Paul Nuki is in Tel Aviv. Paul, what can you tell us? Where on earth are we in this roller coaster ride?
Well, I mean, it really has been a roller coaster. Israelis were convinced, and I don't just mean the government, I mean people on the streets, people living all over Israel, were convinced that there would be a direct strike on Israel by Iran at a minimum, and probably Hezbollah, in revenge for the twin assassinations that happened 2 weeks ago. But 48 hours ago, Iranian diplomats started linking their promised revenge or punishment to the ceasefire and hostage negotiations that have been ongoing really since Christmas, but are hopefully going to come to fruition in the next few days in Doha. And by making that diplomatic link, they've offered the possibility of de-escalating the crisis.
And this is fascinating, really, because people were worried from the beginning of the Gaza war, which we're now 10 months into, and I'll come back to that later in the conversation, but there's always been this worry about it spreading into a region-wide war. We've seen the thing with the Houthis in the Red Sea. Obviously, Hezbollah strikes on Israel over the northern border. It looked like it was spiraling that way. Now suddenly there is an opportunity to turn that around and step back from that, which is fascinating. Can you tell us, I mean, maybe it's all under wraps, but what can you tell us about the talks leading up to this? One thing that struck me in your report today is, you quote Joe Biden saying that it was his expectation that Iran would hold off from a direct strike on Israel if there was a ceasefire deal and so on. That suggests the US president knows more than we do. How does this come about? What's going on behind the scenes?
I mean, it's really difficult to know exactly. But what we do know is that the US has mounted a huge twin military and diplomatic effort. So on the military side, it's moved very substantial assets into the region. So 2 aircraft carrier groups with both offensive and defensive capabilities. And importantly, 2 nuclear submarines carrying huge numbers of Tomahawk cruise missiles, all capable of striking locations across Iran. So, on the one hand, it's brought a lot of muscle to the table, but on the other, it's been pushing diplomats across the world to engage with Iran and talk Iran down. And that's included Western countries, including Britain, France, Germany, but also probably countries like China and perhaps even Russia that have strong relationships now with Iran and whose interests may align with the US in this regard, because neither China nor Russia really wants to see Iran going to war. Russia is heavily reliant on Iran for weapons in its war in Ukraine. And China has last year pulled off quite a coup by cementing relations or opening relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran as a counterbalance to a US power in the region. And it wouldn't like to see that unravel.
Tell me what you know about how this is going down in Israel, because your report in the Telegraph today, and for listeners who may be listening later in the week, we're speaking on Thursday morning, you report that Israeli military chiefs are kind of the implication is they're kind of leaning on Netanyahu and saying, can you show some restraint here, please? Is there a sense that the Americans are having to pressure or getting a bit heavy with the Israeli government on this question?
Difficult to unravel what's reporting and what's real. I don't think that there's any doubt that the Americans are getting tougher. It's clear that Netanyahu, at a minimum, hasn't helped smooth these negotiations over the last few months, and some say that he's undermined them. And it's been well reported that Biden places great store by the negotiations, then he's getting irritated with Bibi. It's also been widely reported that the Mossad, the internal security service is here, Shin Bet, which have been leading the negotiations, have become frustrated at times with Netanyahu adding additional bits and bobs. So I think there is pressure on him, but, Bibi Netanyahu is used to pressure, and he could still throw a spanner in the works as we see things progress over the next few days. Hamas, for that matter, is not being especially helpful. It said it is not formally turning up for these negotiations. Diplomats say that really is just a formality, that actually they'll be in the room next door. And I presume that it is for Hamas's safety, apart from anything else, that the negotiations are being held in Doha rather than Cairo.
Just before we I really want to get onto this question of how, what Israel is like after 10 months of this war. I also want to talk about this dilemma, right? Because there's long been elements of, not just elements really, of the Israeli political and kind of military establishment who have argued, look, having Hezbollah up there is really intolerable, right? It's a danger we can't tolerate. And there seems to have been, in the run-up to this, a sense that, okay, this might actually be our opportunity to go and do something about it. Yes, it might be painful. Yes, it might be bloody, but now's the time. Let's go and do it. Do you perhaps get a sense that maybe there is a view in Israel that actually it would be preferable to have this war now rather than step back, or that they've been gearing up for that?
I certainly think that there are strong elements within the defence establishment who take that view. So even before October 7, there was enormous frustration within the defence establishment in Israel about the implementation of, the former peace deal in Lebanon. It was supposed to keep Hezbollah out of the south, but it didn't work. And Hezbollah have been right up to the border in Israel for a long time. So there's always been a group that says this is intolerable. After October 7, I think that view has become pretty widespread in Israel. I don't talk to anyone who doesn't think it's intolerable that they should have this terrorist group on their border. But what they can do about it is not so easy. Gallant, the defense minister, is reported to have argued very strongly in the immediate aftermath of October 7 that they hit Hezbollah immediately and go to war in the north. It's been reported that, the US were having none of that. They said that it would cause a regional war, and in any case, didn't immediately have the assets there to help protect Israel. And of course, dealing with Hezbollah, you have to deal with Iran. Hezbollah is Iran's ace card. It's deterrent in the region. It doesn't yet have a nuclear power. So Hezbollah is the next best thing as far as Iran is concerned. It's what stops Israel attacking and striking Iran in Iran's eyes. So there's no hitting Hezbollah hard without involving Iran, or at least that's what many analysts say.
Paul, over the past several weeks, in fact, since October 7th, we've heard a lot of talk about a region-wide war, or warnings of a regional war. This may sound like a slightly naive question, but given that Israel and Iran do not have a land border and they would be the principal antagonists in this war, what exactly are we talking about? What do we think, if this nightmare situation, which US diplomats and other Western diplomats are working very hard to defuse and avoid, if it were to occur, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, people have gameplayed this a little bit. It could be a really huge and violent clash on a par with America's war with Iraq, for example, because the difficulty is it is unlikely to be contained in a tit for tat for very long. Both sides, Iran and Israel, fear greatly for their own deterrence. Both of them feel that they could be taken out in an entirety, and the threat is existential. But also, America has bases all over the region, and Iran sees America and Israel as partners. So those bases would come under threat. America may take the view that it had to act first to protect them, etc. And Israel itself sees its military capability as being most useful in crippling Iran's economy. So the nuclear sites might be very difficult to get to. They're buried deep underground. Iran is a mountainous region. All its missile silos are buried deep in mountains. Very difficult for planes or even Tomahawk missiles to get to. Much easier is to hit its oil export terminals, which are few in number and account for the great bulk of its exports. And the other vulnerability in Iran is its water system. It's a huge country. It's short of water. It's got quite archaic water systems. And if you took those out, which wouldn't be enormously difficult, you could cause huge economic chaos and political unrest across the country. So you can see that if militaries started taking those sort of actions, that the war would escalate very, very quickly indeed, or at least would have the potential to do so.
Thank you. And lastly, I wanted to just take the opportunity to reflect on just how long this has been going on, right? So all of this, okay, there's a context. Okay, Israel and Iran have been kind of enemies for a very, very long time. But this is all kind of follows this crisis that began on October 7th last year. We're more than 10 months into that now. I mean, obviously, it's been very difficult for us to get into Gaza and talk about that. You are in Israel, and generally, our reporters operate in Israel rather than Gaza, partly because the Israelis won't let reporters into Gaza. But it gives us a sense of what's going on in Israeli society. To the best of your ability, could you just give me a sense of, well, as far as we know, what the situation is in Gaza, but also your sense of what those 10 months of tension and conflict have done to the people you're meeting in Israel?
Yeah, well, in Gaza, I don't think there's any doubt that things are pretty horrific. I went into Gaza twice with the IDF early on in the conflict, and it's pretty clear that the devastation there is enormous. And, daily there are more strikes. Yesterday, I think, or at least in the last 24 hours, the IDF reported 20 strikes. The Hamas-run Health Authority was reporting scores dead. The total dead now in Gaza is around 40,000. And many experts believe that it'll actually end up much higher because there are huge numbers of missing people. And on top of that, you've got the horror of people being moved time and time again. You've got the spread of disease, including, by the looks of it, polio now. Scabies, I've seen images of infecting children in the most horrible way. There are mounds of rubbish across the region, which is infecting watercourses and making hygiene of any sort extraordinarily difficult. So I don't think that there's any doubt that the suffering there is immense and desperately, from a humanitarian point, needs to be relieved. In Israel, there is also, quite considerable stress and anxiety across the nation. People are scared. Although parts of Tel Aviv are busy, other parts of the country are very, very quiet. People scared to leave their homes, lest they wander too far from their bomb shelters. People with children are obviously particularly worried. Mothers suffering great separation anxiety when they go to school and the like. And families with older children are now seeing their children talking about leaving Israel. And actually quite a number of people are leaving Israel, seeking second passports to live in Europe, America, and further afield. And then in the north of Israel, of course, 10 kilometers or more from the northern border, it's a complete ghost town. People have had to move out of their homes. The numbers vary a bit, but I think it's in the region of 80,000 people are living in hotels. And all those moshavs, all those communities in the north have, for the moment at least, been left as ghost towns. And that's because they fear, quite rightly, all the rockets coming in from Hezbollah in Lebanon. So in some ways, Israel has lost ground in this conflict for the first time since the founding war. So both sides are suffering, there's no doubt. And the difficulty is that they both have leaders who are far from peacemakers. Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, the mastermind behind the massacre in October, he started this thing with the clear intention of building a conflict that would draw others in and might eventually destroy Israel. And he shows no sign, in my view, of making a peace. And then you've got Bibi Netanyahu. He's a man that, the minute he's out of power, he's in deep trouble. He's got domestic court cases being brought against him in Israel on corruption charges. That could result in jail. And he's got the threat of arrest warrants from the International Court in The Hague now. And it seems to me likely that, those arrest warrants will eventually be issued. So he's got no reason to create a peace. The minute he does, his right wing that he relies on for his power will get rid of him. And he will face the music.
Well,
so it's
anything
very,
else
very difficult.
that you think we should know this week?
Well, I think the one thing to consider on the optimistic side is that if there is a deal, it could mushroom to become a real peace deal across the region. The Biden administration is putting a lot of store, not just in the immediate ceasefire and the hostage negotiation, but to use that as a mechanism to leverage a much bigger deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, and a deal which would be contingent on a two-state solution and a final peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, that's a dream, but politicians do need to dream. And it seems to me that with the right leadership and the right vision, that could still be a realistic possibility.
Paul Nuki, thank you very much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
Now, Twitter reminds me that 10 years ago this week, I stumbled across a column of Russian armoured personnel carriers driving through a hole in the border fence into Ukraine. Last week, Ukrainian armoured vehicles went the other way. The offensive in Kursk region is the first foreign invasion of Russia since the Second World War. It's changed the dynamic of the 2.5-year invasion of Ukraine. Dominic Nicholls, the Telegraph's Associate Editor Defence and co-host of our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest, joined me to discuss the significance of the development. Now, 10 days ago, Ukrainian forces launched a surprise offensive into Russian territory. It is the largest incursion, invasion, whatever you want to call it, of sovereign Russian land since the Second World War. It is therefore historic. And for that reason, on Battle Lines, we are turning to our Associate Editor Defence,
Yeah, the
right?
brackets are doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Associate Editor brackets.
Dom
defense.
Nicholls, who's been following this very closely day to day on our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. Dom, taking a slight step back, could you just walk us through what has happened over the past week, how this began, what's happened, and where we are now, and what the significance of that is? Just paint a picture for us of the development of this battle and bring us up to today.
Well, thanks, Roland. Thanks for having me here. So if I go back a little further than that, if I may. So what happened over the last months, years, decades? Vladimir Putin and the system massively underestimated Ukraine, gave them no agency. This isn't a Ukrainian advance into Russia. This is NATO. I've seen reports this is NATO. I've seen Chechen commanders saying they are French soldiers and they're looking forward to sending body bags back to Paris. I mean, totally denying Ukraine agency whatsoever, or saying they could possibly pull this off themselves. And what that meant was that Russia took the view that Ukraine was so totally maxed out, just trying to keep its fingers in the dam in the Donbass and elsewhere, holding the front line, that Russia could take the risk of largely leaving the huge border, the remaining border with Ukraine, uncovered. So there were a few dragon's teeth, these concrete sort of triangle pyramid structures to stop armoured vehicles moving. They had conscripts. It's inside Russia, of course, so they've got conscripts, they've got the Rosgvardia, the National Guard, but they didn't have heavy military fortifications all along the border. And therefore, Ukraine, surprisingly, surprised everybody, were able to push through. So exactly what they failed to do last year in the counteroffensive in the east and the south of Ukraine, which was not that surprising for those who really understand military stuff, because what they were asked to do was the hardest thing a military force could be expected to do, an opposed armoured thrust through a very heavily defended minefield and extensive 3 lines of fortifications. That's pretty A-level stuff, and they were supposed to do it straight off the bat. So it didn't work, the counteroffensive last year. But what they have shown here is that if there's not that heavy force opposing you, and offence is always harder than defence, then they are able to manoeuvre, and they're able to get all the different parts of the military orchestra working together instead of just being a big old noisy mess. So combined arms warfare, as it's called, the infantry working with the tanks and the engineers and the air defence and all the different parts working together. Ukraine has shown they were able to do that. So yes, Ukraine took a risk by using forces that might have been used elsewhere to try and push back the slowly creeping, very heavy attritional advance of Russia, particularly in the east. But they took the risk that this was worth an assault into Russia for various different reasons that we can dig into. But what they've done is they've moved, it's so difficult to get information out, but we think probably about 4 brigades worth, so maybe 15, 20,000 people, depending on the shape of those brigades, their particular task, if it's a heavy metal brigade or if it's an infantry heavy brigade or other things, other specialised brigades. But we think about those kind of numbers and push them into Kursk and Belgorod Oblast, the Russian regions bordering northeast Ukraine. Now, they haven't gone too far. We think they're about 20-ish miles into Russia on a front, a width of about 30 or 40 miles. It's not exact, and as I say, it's difficult to get information. So if you zoom right out on Google Maps, it's not a great advance, but they've taken more ground in the last 10 days than Russia has taken inside Ukraine in the last year. And we've been going on about this slow, steady, incremental advance of Russia. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, that's the inexorable advance of Russia gobbling up Ukrainian territory. Oh, but this bit that Ukraine has taken doesn't matter. Or equally, well, this is a huge advance, because it's not really in the grand scheme of things. I don't think it's designed to be. But there are some small numbers of thousands of Ukrainian troops inside Russia now. The advance seems to have slowed in the last 24, 36, 48 hours-ish, as Russia has, we think, moved forces from elsewhere in Russia and in Ukraine to try and hold them back. But they are slowly still advancing in some areas, we think. Quite what they're there to do, we can discuss, but we don't, there's a lot of speculation. But they are still there, and they haven't suffered a heavy pushback yet.
Where do you think this is meant to be going? Because, as you say, there may be maybe 20 miles into Russia, a front of about 30 miles. The advance seems to be kind of inching along still. It's extremely difficult to get information out of the ground there. But the question that I'm asking myself is where do you go from here? Because Russia is a vast place, even order of magnitude larger than Ukraine itself is also very large. So taking more territory doesn't seem to necessarily gain you anything. I suppose if you continue to advance, you risk eventual encirclement, going too deep. If you try and stay put, it seems to me that you'd end up risking, digging in and then having another attritional war of that kind that seems to favour Russia positionally. If you withdraw, have you achieved anything? What's your best guess of where this goes next and what the Ukrainian intention is?
Well, so straight off the bat, I don't think this is an attempt to go and encircle or destroy or own the Kursk nuclear power plant, which is about 20 k's further on from where we think the forward line of Ukrainian troops are. Really interestingly, Russia is digging fortified positions around the Kursk nuclear power plant. Vladimir Putin, nothing says your lightning 3-day offensive is going brilliantly, quite like ordering your own troops to dig in around your nuclear power station 2.5 years later. But I don't think that's what Ukraine is after. I'm not even sure this is a land grab. It's an interesting area where they've gone in. The way the border is shaped there are little chunks, if you like, digging into Ukraine. So that is quite a sensible area to attack if you want land, because if Ukraine is able to take it and sort of fill in those potholes, if you like, they would have their own forces to left and right of them. They would have interior lines of resupply, so they wouldn't be in so much danger about being encircled. And if you take land, then in any future negotiations that I don't really think are going to get going at least until next year, next spring, and I doubt if they could hold on to their land until then. But let's say you hold on to some land in Russia when negotiations start. Well, hey, what a brilliant bargaining chip. But as I said, I don't think they're trying to do that now. I think what they're trying to do is prove the concept, prove that they can do it to themselves and to Putin and to Washington, Brussels, Berlin, London, Beijing. Just show that they can do it and also hold that border at risk. They've shown that they can do this. Now, if they have to get out, and I'm not saying they do, but if they have to get out and they do so in good order, it's not a rout, they're not chased out by Russia, then what a message to leave, to say that we can do this anytime we like, fellas. It's a bit like an amphibious assault. An amphibious task group full of hairy-ass Royal Marines can sort of wobble up and down an enemy coastline and threaten the coastline and not actually land, but then 24 hours later they'll be 200 miles up the coast. And are they going to land there, or are they going to go somewhere else down the coast? So the land force doesn't quite know where they have to apportion their forces to head off this attack. Well, I think Ukraine's done something very similar here. If they can get out and just prove that they can go in and dent the Russian border at a time and place of their choosing, then that means that Russia will have to take the threat on their border much more seriously than they had done before. I would imagine one part of this is a hope by Ukraine. I use the word lightly because I was always told by one of my former commanding officers, if the word hope enters your plan at all, you haven't planned enough, which is pretty good. But I would have thought Ukraine would hope that Russia would try and draw some air defense assets, some long-range artillery, some troops and tanks and all the rest of it out of the Donbass in particular to reinforce this area. There's some evidence that that's happening, but not a huge amount, and it hasn't stopped this slow incremental advance over the last 10 days by Russia in the Donbass. So it's very early days to say whether or not that's worked, but it would be another thing for them to have to think about if they're able to get out in good order.
You said at the beginning of this, the Russians had underestimated the Ukrainians, consistently underestimated them. It also surprised us, didn't it? It took lots of people by surprise. I suppose the question is, if the Ukrainians are capable of this, why haven't they done it before?
Well,
it's 2.5 years into the war.
Yeah. So what this attack has shown, I think, it's knocked down a couple of the hardy perennial arguments that have been banding around for the last 2.5 years. Since the start of this full-scale invasion, we were told, the tank is dead. Don't need tanks. Drones can do everything now. Tanks are just lumbering 60-ton metal beasts. They're going to get whacked from above. Don't need tanks anymore. Well, I think firstly, if tanks are dead, then why are both sides clamoring to get hold of them? But this attack has shown how good. You can have as many drones as you like, but if they can't fly because it's windy or it's dark and you haven't got a thermal camera or you don't own the electromagnetic spectrum because you've been jammed, then suddenly yeah, that tank might be quite old and lumbering, but 60 tons of T-72 coming at you at 30 k's an hour, that's going to focus your mind. Right, so number one, tank is dead. No, it isn't. And the second thing that this attack has shown is that this idea of a transparent battlefield, you can see everything all the time, nobody can move anywhere without us all knowing about it. No, that's gone as well. Surprise is back on the menu. Ukraine was able to gather this force and push it over the border in good order. It took some very clever military techniques and tactics about, as we think, bringing down the Russian surveillance drones, jamming the radios. So there was an electromagnetic black hole, if you like, into which Ukraine could push its tanks. So it did take a lot of thinking about. But at its very base level, why hasn't it happened up till now? Because it's blooming difficult. I used to train new recruits in the British Army, and we took 11 weeks then to get someone from Civilian Street up to the ability to operate as a pair. So the soldier could look after him or herself in the field, could administer themselves, clean themselves, clean their rifle, could operate as a pair. That's it. And that took 11 weeks. Right now, Ukraine having to do that in, we think, 6 weeks now. That's the training they're doing. But that's just to get a basic infantry soldier. So you then have to train on tanks and the armoured vehicles and the artillery and the air defence and everything else together. So you have to become an expert in that field, and then they all have to work together as well. All this takes a huge amount of time to get, as I said earlier, the military orchestra all working together. You might be able to have the brass section and the strings and all the rest of it knowing what they're doing, and they could be fantastic on their own, but put them together without preparing and training and working alongside each other for a long time, and it just descends into a complete mess. So it takes a huge amount of time to do combined arms manoeuvre, which is what they've done here.
I'm interested in the significance of crossing the Russian border as well. I mean, we talked about Russia leaving the border areas relatively lightly defended, kind of assuming that there wasn't going to be a major Ukrainian push back into Russia. Perhaps that was a question of complacency, but perhaps that also had something to do with ultimately Russia's deterrent, the fact that it's a nuclear power and that one doesn't usually expect adversaries to challenge the territorial integrity of nuclear powers. Do you think that is a factor that has prevented Ukraine from taking the war into Russia, I mean, on the ground previously? And do you think that this partially challenges the strength of that deterrence?
I mean, this whole argument about nuclear deterrence has been rumbling, I mean, not just since the start of the full-scale invasion. It's a whole PhD subject in its own right. I mean, it's very, very difficult, very, very complicated. Does the mere fact that country A has nuclear weapons mean that they don't have to have any other conventional force? Not really, because what are they going to do? Just resort to nuclear weapons every time? Well, no. I mean, there is still that hard stop. You get the characters in the Russian system like Dmitry Medvedev, who will constantly rattle the nuclear saber every time there's an outrage, or every time Western countries decide to donate tanks or long-range missiles, whatever. There's always this effort to rattle the saber. I think we saw that last week, first couple of days after this push into Russia. Russian troops at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that was taken. It's in southern Ukraine. It was taken by Russian troops in March 2022, just after the start of the full-scale invasion. They started burning a load of tyres under one of the cooling towers, so it made huge black smoke. I mean, people could tell it's not on fire. It hasn't been hit by something, and there's not about to be a nuclear meltdown. But it was interpreted as Russia just saying, "Hey, look, do you want to play the old nuclear card? Just remember what we've got here." So that was interpreted as just a little reminder. And we shouldn't be glib with this. The prospect of an exchange of nuclear weapons is horrific. But equally, how realistic is it? What military effect would it offer? Certainly, what they're called sort of tactical nuclear weapons, battlefield nuclear weapons. I mean, it sounds a bit glib to try and make the distinction, but a smaller, lower yield, 50 kilotons, sort of 10 times the size of Hiroshima, nuclear bomb on a country the size of Ukraine. I mean, you'd need an awful lot of them to have any military effect. And so to go from nothing to the amount you'd need to stop the Ukrainian advance if they broke through the lines, I mean, it's almost It's beyond where we are at the moment. So there's always this argument about, will Russia respond with nuclear weapons if such and such happens? And you get the commentators in Russia threatening it just to keep it on the boil, just to keep it in our minds. But we've seen over the last couple of years these constant red lines put down by Russia. If you do this, we'll do that. Not from Putin necessarily, but from his commentators that he allows to speak and wouldn't say what they did without knowing that they were on message. But you get these red lines. You supply tanks, nuclear weapons. Okay, the tanks go, nothing happened. You supply long-range weapons, ATACMS from the US, very long range, very high precision, nuclear weapons. And one by one, these red lines have been eroded. Now, that's not to say you could then take too much confidence from that and keep pushing. It's a hugely
I suppose
difficult
the point
area.
here, I suppose the difference here is that this is a conventional incursion. I mean, it's not. If we say invasion, that sounds like an attempted conquest, a kind of Operation Barbarossa, 5 million men marching on Moscow. It's clearly not that. They're clearly not going to. I assume they're not going to go and try and go to Moscow. I measured it this morning. It's about 500 kilometers as the crow flies from where we think the Ukrainians are to the southwest corner of the Kremlin, where the main kind of gate is that Vladimir Putin drives in and out. Yeah, I thought I'd measure it just out of interest. A hell of a long way to cover, and I don't think they're going to do that. But Russia's nuclear doctrine says you can use nuclear weapons. I think when it says something along the lines of if the existence of the Russian Federation is threatened. Now, I don't think this incursion necessarily meets that threshold, even if you're a relatively hawkish Russian. But nonetheless, suddenly, for the first time since the Second World War, for the first time since Russia acquired nuclear weapons, there is an enemy force inside Russian territory. So I suppose the question is this different to all those other perhaps artificial red lines that we have seen passed?
Well,
previously?
I mean, it is different for the simple fact of what you've just said. I mean, this has been foreign troops on Russian soil uninvited. So, yes, of course it is different. Now, whether or not it's an existential threat to the system, to the state, you could argue, well, I mean, certainly not physically, it's not militarily, but what lessons does it leave? What ideas does it raise in the minds of the Siloviki, that those people around Putin for whom they tolerate him because it's good for business, but actually when he starts becoming a liability, then there is power there. I mean, it takes something to organise, but there is power there. Whether or not this is enough to make them think, hey, this guy's gone too far. We've now got Ukrainian troops on our soil. I can't send my kids to Oxford. I can't see my mistress down on the French Riviera. My yacht is impounded. Life's not quite what it was 3 years ago. Is this enough for me to get together with the lads and say, right, Vladimir Vladimirovich has got to go? I mean, we simply don't. We simply don't know. But in pure military terms, this is not enough to threaten the existence of Putin's system right now. But it is uncharted territory. We don't know. Since Russia's laid down that doctrine, or the Soviet Union laid down the doctrine, Russia inherited it, didn't change much as far as I could tell. No, it's never happened before. So we simply don't know. All we can reach for, I would suggest, is that when it comes to nuclear brinkmanship, Cuban Missile Crisis, 1984, the war games that nearly went hot in the sort of NATO war games, when it comes to that level of nuclear brinkmanship, Russia, like the Soviet Union before it, has shown itself to be a responsible actor, a rational actor in their own minds, but also when it comes to the big boys games of nuclear confrontation, they have shown themselves to be stable. I'm picking my words very carefully here because I'm trying to divorce it from what we've seen inside Ukraine and the totally bonkers idea of invading in the first place. But if nuclear diplomacy is all about the three C's, capability, credibility, and communication. So capability, do you have them in the first place? Credibility, do you have a doctrine that says how and when you'd use it? And are you seen to be rational in that? Are you sticking to those lines? Do you change your method of use and your means of use every few years? And then communication, you have a respected and trusted way of reaching out, just touching the other side and just telling them when the temperature's coming up and when it's coming down. Now, Russia and the Soviet Union before it has shown on those three things to be stable over the last 80 odd years since we've had these things. Whether or not that is different now, given the circumstances of a war for Putin that's not going brilliantly, the changed dynamic of the international system, and now foreign troops on his soil, I don't know. And it's very, very difficult to assess this because it is such high level, very political stakes, and we just don't have that insight. I don't have that insight into the Kremlin.
Dom, thank you very much for coming to join us. I'd encourage our listeners, if you don't already, to do tune into Ukraine's Latest, where you'll hear Dom
Thank you.
most days giving very detailed updates, day-to-day updates on the Ukraine war.
Get my check on the way out, do I?
Yeah, precisely.
That's all for Battle Lines this time. Please join us again next week for more of the Telegraph's best foreign reporting. Goodbye. Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our news, analysis and dispatches from around the world, subscribe to The Telegraph or sign up to Dispatches, which brings stories from our award-winning correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a live blog on our website where you can follow updates on Israel and Gaza as they come in throughout the day, including insight from contributors to this podcast. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app, and if you have a moment, leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. As disinformation is a particular problem during conflict, we are relying on your support more than ever. Battle Lines is part of wider Telegraph foreign coverage in our podcasts. If you're interested in finding out more about the war in Ukraine, you can listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. Battle Lines is produced by David Degahi, and the executive producers are David Knowles and Louisa Wells.